City University Television presents the American Theater Wing Seminars. Working in the theater. This seminar, playwright, director, choreographer.
Welcome to the American Theater Wing's Working in the Theater Seminars, coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Now, in their 29th year, these seminars give you the opportunity to learn from the professionals as they share their experiences in working in the theater. Today's seminar is on playwrights, directors, and choreographers. These are the artists who provide the creative heart of the theater that provide the marvelous productions we see on the stage and allow us to show how the magic of theater is created. Although we are holding this seminar not long after the tragedy of September 11th, we have asked our panelists not to dwell on those horrible events as we look to the future. I'm Isabel Stevenson, Chairman of the Board of the American Theater Wing, and I now would like to introduce our moderator for the seminar, founder of the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center, George C. White. George.
Thank you, Isabel. I'd like to I have the honor, actually, to introduce the panel, whose collective credits are, as they say, too numerous to mention, but I will simply say what they do. On my far right is choreographer Rob Ashford, and next to him is playwright Michael Frayn. And sitting next to me is Lynn Meadow, who is a directress. Immediately to my left, next to me, is Wayne Cilento, or Cilento, depending on how well you want to speak Italian, and who is a choreographer. And next to him is playwright and lyricist Greg Kotis. And on my far left is Sean Matthias, who is a director. And I would like to start, or get the puck on the ice, as they say, with a question to Lynn Meadow, if I may. You're in the process of building a new Manhattan Theater Club. Do you have to do this if you want to get a job as a director? Build your own theater?
You don't have to, but it helps. And we're actually adding to the Manhattan Theater Club campus because we already have 2 theaters, and this will be a 3rd theater on Broadway. But back in the 70s, when I began at the Manhattan Theater Club and began doing this thing of running a theater, it was so that I could have a career as a director. And I think being a woman in the 70s and to be hired as a director was not what it is today. So it definitely did help. It surely is not necessary, and it's less necessary now than it was then.
What would you say to, particularly to young women trying to get a job? How do you get a job doing that?
I think in the within the last, 5 to 10 years in New York, there's been a lot more activity and a lot of smaller theaters and a lot of work going on, a kind of resurgence of people really being excited about being in the theater and young people being interested in being in the theater, and that means more work. The best way to direct is to direct. And the best way to write is to write and choreograph, but I think to try to get a position somewhere and do your work is the best thing someone can do. Also, I have had experience with wonderful assistants who have gone on to have terrific careers as directors, so that's also a very valid way of going about the business of starting.
Sean, would you say that also perhaps getting to know a playwright, now let the playwright sleep in it, would be, or nurturing a playwright so that you become their director, is that useful?
I mean, it's a great way in. I haven't really much had that privilege because most of the writers I've worked with have been well dead. So I have, most of my career has been made in sort of redefining what an older play is. But on the occasions I've worked with writers, it's been very thrilling. And I think that a lot of young directors have made their careers absolutely being married, as it were, to particular writers. Certainly, of course, in Great Britain, where we have the subsidised theatre, that's where most writers and directors sort of are nurtured. And the relationship between a writer and director can only come to fruition when the writer is produced. Like you said, a director has to direct. It's all very well for a writer sitting at home writing, but a writer only learns to become a playwright by being produced in the theatre. And having Michael may disagree, but having a good relationship with a director is very useful. Of course, sometimes that runs out of steam. It's like a marriage. You may have done 5 or 6 things together, and then you need to part. It's the same as the relationship between a director and a designer. I did, I think, 7 or 8 things with one particular designer, and after that period of time, we have had a huge break. You know, I think that's normal. The creative process is one that needs to be reinvented constantly, and one looks to other collaborators for one's impetus.
Wayne, you being a choreographer, and Rob too, so both of you would you talk to us about what seems, at least from my viewpoint, one of the more arcane or difficult jobs, which is choreography.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you had, I believe, started in chorus line.
Right.
So that was, I mean, you grew up into it. But how does one start there, too? I mean, you just, apart from obviously not having 2 left feet.
You mean becoming a choreographer?
Becoming a choreographer.
helps.
I don't think every dancer could become a choreographer.
No, exactly. What is the mindset?
Well, I think you get either you have the knowledge or the ability to do it, which I didn't really know if I had or not, and I wasn't interested, to tell you the truth. I wanted to go to Hollywood and be Gene Kelly or someone like that, which they weren't doing anymore. But and I got tricked into it. I mean, Chorus Line gave me a lot of recognition as being one of the best dancers on Broadway, and then I started choreographing by doing a lot of national commercials. But it was, it was. So I did that for like almost 10 years before I even approached the stage. I wasn't interested, really. I really wanted to just dance. So I got to know the camera really well. And then I slowly, my first Broadway show was Baby. And that was a difficult process because it's making natural people dance, you know, like real people. And it's not, there wasn't an ensemble of dancers. It was a group of real people in a doctor's office talking about having a child and singing and dancing. So, but I think I was able to do that because of the commercials, because of making those real people move and sing and dance about soda or something ridiculous like that. And then you just start, it's like Lynn said, then you start learning your craft. And you just keep going. But I also flip-flopped. I performed, I choreographed, I performed, I choreographed until I actually really enjoyed taking on that process, which is not an easy process. Rob?
For me, I started obviously as a dancer in the chorus, and then as a dance captain. And that was a great learning forum, I realized, to see how a show is put together and how it works. So that helped a lot. And then from being a dance captain, I think I was always the dance captain almost in every show that I did here in New York, because you have a knack for it. You have an eye to be able to see well, half of it's being able to see the problems, and the other half is being able to give the notes and make the corrections without offending people.
A therapist.
It's a therapist. It is. There's no doubt about it, and that has been invaluable learning when you're dealing with actors, and because there's egos involved all the time. And if you've had 15 years in the trenches of the dressing rooms of Broadway, going from stars like Julie Andrews and Chita Rivera to, you know, the fifth chorus girl on the left saying, you know, you really got to be on number 2 for that. You really, you know, so that's a great learning thing. And then from there I started assisting choreographers, and that's another great way to learn that. In that capacity, you learn the backstage stuff. You learn how to work with a dance arranger. You learn how to sit in on a production meeting.
How do you, stop a second, well, how do you work with a dance arranger, and what does a dance arranger do?
Well, the dance arranger really makes the music for anytime, say, a number in a show opens up and there's just a dance with no vocals and just dance for dance sake. The dance arranger has written that music, usually off of a melody line or some line from the song that the composer has written. But then the dance arranger takes that and plays with that, and it's a partnership between the choreographer and the dance arranger to really say what the number should be. You can do anything. You have a a melody line of a song. You know, let's make it a can-can. What would it be like if it was, you know, if it sounded, you know, Spanish? What would it be like if it sounded like a honky-tonk? Whatever you can do, and that sometimes helps fuel you creatively to.
But it's also
to
very
bend your maneuver.
dangerous to go to those extremes, you know, with the dance arranger. I mean, when I did Tommy, the hard part about Tommy was, and the brilliant part about Janine Tesori's was, you know, creating extra music or expanding on the music that was true to Pete Townshend's music. You know, instead of going on a rampage and just saying, okay, let's do a Charleston here, which I would have been destroyed with. But so you have to stay true and pure to the score, and also keep telling the story about what's going on. I mean, I don't know if everyone really knows what choreographers do. I mean, I think it's a very intricate,
Well, that's right. Yeah, that's important
hard
to
process to carry a through line and keep telling the story. I
And
mean,
directors,
you
same
know,
thing.
and really, and bonding with the director. You know, becoming one, which is the best collaboration.
We are now seeing choreographer, director. And how does that happen?
Well, I think you get to a certain point where you have your own vision, and it's almost easier to do what you see in your head directorially and choreographically. So the flow is better. I think when there's a collaboration between a director and a choreographer, I think that when it works, it's brilliant, because then you're really taking two creative elements and making it one. And if you could manage that, then it's getting a little bit
That's
the best
only
of
recently
everything.
that we had that category.
But Jerome Robbins was a
Yeah,
director,
absolutely.
choreographer.
Right.
Right, but he wasn't billed as such. He was a choreographer, he was a director.
I think-
Today we find choreographer, director, and you're Billy.
I think
Well,
you
what was he
find a
billed
lot
on for
of
Fiddler
director
on the Roof? He
choreographers,
wasn't.
Does that eliminate the
Director,
director?
Well, yeah, I guess. I mean, like Michael Bennett he was a choreographer, and then he became the
Bob
director and the
Fosse.
choreographer.
Bob
Fosse.
Fosse, you know, the same thing. So I think if you have the knack, and if you're fortunate enough, you can cross over and do that.
I also think it depends on the show.
Right.
Certain shows need a style every minute of the show, and
Right.
certain shows don't really have book scenes or
Right.
or any real dramatic scenes that
Right.
aren't enhanced by movement. So those kind of shows, like the shows that Fosse did, Chicago, Pippin, these kind of
Right.
shows, you need to be in charge of every movement, because there aren't long book scenes
Right.
that a director can take charge of. I
If
think
Michael Frayn wrote a musical, then I would hope that Sean or I could direct it, and then you could choreograph.
But you have to
Right.
keep moving the piece along, which
Right.
is also
Right.
another
Right.
difficult thing. And I was thinking whether, like a pro quarterback, you have to see pass patterns. Don't you see patterns?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, that are
Absolutely.
very complex.
And also moving the set along and making transitions stay alive. And there's, you know, blackouts are not very popular these days. People want to see the whole mechanism of everything, so it's kind of keeping the motion and the play moving.
I think. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think what people tend to lose sight of, though, is this idea basically of storytelling. And the job, our
Absolutely.
jobs as directors and choreographers is to tell the story that the writer has created. And that's, and there's a lot of decoration involved, but finally, we have to keep our eye on the big picture and,
Right.
and what story is being told. And when we lose track of that, actually, I think our craft and the decoration of our craft suffers.
Right.
Well, speaking of that and the craft, I'll start with Greg here. Tell us about your relationship to directors and choreographers, and actually how you found them, because where you started from, and you know.
Right. Well, I come from Off Broadway, and I spent a lot of time in Chicago in what's called the Off Loop scene there. And my recent experience with Urinetown was my first commercial experience. So that was the first time that I worked with a commercial director and choreographer. Previous to that, you know, in poor theater, you do everything yourself. So you know, the idea of division of labor is alien. It's a confusing idea, because anyway, you do everything yourself in that world. But in this world, it was really fantastic, because just for example, in some of the musical scenes and working with our choreographer, John Carafa, in some of the numbers, he was able to sort of show us where the scene, the musical scene, and the number could really take off, and music didn't exist there. So he worked very closely with the composer, Mark Holman, to make scenes and numbers which were fine before really sort of explosive. And that was, that was wonderful. And with the director as well, he was also someone who sort of he taught us about the piece. You lay out this blueprint of the script, and they're the people who come in and say, here's where it goes, here's the arc of it. And they were very active in telling us how to make it better.
In other words, they were saying that to you rather than you saying it to them. It's sort of interesting. That seems what you're saying. Is that true?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when we first started working on it, we of course thought it was absolutely perfect and nothing, couldn't imagine changing anything. But that we would be taken aside and say, and there's one number in the second act, which is now this very strong number called "Snuff That Girl." Where in the story of the poor, sort of they get worked up into a bloody froth. And that number didn't exist, and Rando said that, look, you have this really strong number in the second position. If you have something strong before it, it's going to make the whole thing stronger. And we at first thought, oh no, it'll exhaust the act. No one will want to pay attention after these two numbers. But he was right. He understood that you add more fuel to the fire, and it just makes the whole thing burn brighter. So that was an education to me, learning from someone who was seeing the picture much beyond what we imagine in our heads. And that was, it was an education in trust and also paying attention to what people are saying.
But I think that's what's good about collaborating, because everyone pushes everyone's buttons, and pushes you to an extreme where it gets a little bit better. A director would push me to do something maybe I didn't see. So I do think it works. When it works, it really works well.
If it is a good partnership, I
Right.
think it's like a couple that can finish each other's sentences. It's that kind of thing
Right.
where you could just pick up right where
Right.
the director left off, and they could do the same with you. And also that there's no ego involved there.
Right.
That's another,
Right.
unknown. Like, does
Right.
the director welcome that or not? And so it's a very tentative relationship at first. That's why if you get with a director that you can work well with, or a choreographer, I think that you go back and go back and go back, because it's tough to get that shorthand.
But I also think what you said is true also. I think you get to a place where, I've had a lot of assistants, and I feel there's a certain point in your relationship where you have to move on to a different energy. You need different things that will come into your life to get you over that hump. Otherwise, you become very safe.
And some people are better at collaborating than others. I mean, some directors would feel that they really do carry the whole picture in their head, and they've got a very strong sense of it from the outset. I'm absolutely not like that. I mean, people may think that I'm like that when they see my finished result, because maybe it seems so presented, but actually I'm not like that. I love working with everyone, and I think it depends how you communicate. I think I do happen to be a good listener, so therefore I would listen to the people I'm working with and what their ideas are, because in my point of view, how could the thing could only be, the end product could only be better having everyone's talent and input.
Right.
But some directors aren't like that, and it doesn't mean to say that they are lesser. They just can hold the thing more strongly, more particularly in their head, and they are more autocratic. So it's a style thing, I suppose.
Michael,
George,
I'm sorry,
We've
go ahead.
let Michael sit here so quietly.
I know, well, I've-
absorbing it all.
He's playing
get him
cleanup.
Writing it all
No,
down.
he's
tonight.
ready.
Really
He's waiting.
He's waiting. He's playing cleanup. He's playing cleanup. No, Michael, I wasn't ignoring you. I was waiting because I have a lot of things to ask you about. Also, because you have the variety of your work is stunning as well. Anyone that can go from Noises Off, which is marvelous, pure farce, to Copenhagen, which is an incredible mind trip. and then also write a novel like Headlong, which means that I'm amazed at your mental furniture. You have a huge attic up there of all kinds of things that you draw on. Where did you come from? I mean, how did all this get going?
Well, it's not mental furniture. It's more like a lumber warehouse up there. I agree very strongly about with Sean about the importance of the relationship between the writer and the director. A writer depends absolutely on the director he works with. And in the case of a new play, the relationship begins long before you ever get near the rehearsal room. A good director works with a writer and persuades the writer, first of all, to get the play right. I worked mostly with Michael Blakemore, and Michael Blakemore is terrific at actually persuading you against your will to rethink the thing. We always read a play through together for a start, and he makes me read it to him. I have no acting ability of any sort whatsoever. I can't even hit the right stress in my own lines. So it's a very painful and embarrassing procedure. But it means that we hear the whole thing together, and he stops me at every line and says, boy, it's tedious, irritating questions like, but why does she say that? And I say, well, it's obvious why she says it. It's obvious why she says it. Well, she says, well, explain. And I say, well, all right, I'll take it up. But I have to say it's a very unfair relationship, because if a director works on a new play, nobody who sees the play knows what the writer's done and what the director's done. So the writer usually gets the credit for it. And Michael Blakemore, who is one of the best directors of new plays in Britain, and I think in New York as well, has not, in Britain, had all the credit he should have, because people don't know the contribution is made. If you want to make a career as a director, I would recommend any aspirant to stick with the classics, because if you do a production of Hamlet and everyone's on roller skates, they know that's the director's decision. They like it, they don't like it, but they put it down to the director gets the credit for it. They know that Shakespeare didn't say everyone is on roller skates.
Which is why I keep away from all those new writers, you see. So.
What's wrong with me? But there's something so thrilling about being in that process with a writer and helping to create, and something very infuriating. And it's wonderful that you point out about not getting credit for lines that you've written, never mind business that's created. On the other hand, it's just so thrilling to be at that birthing process. And the image I always feel is that you're in the jungle and there's no path that's there. You have to just hack your way through the jungle and create a path. And there's something so great about that. Then others can go on the path that perhaps you found. But
it really is a radical process, or it can be a really radical process. Michael Blakemore did the original production of Noises Off, and he really made me work on that play, really made me rewrite. My original idea, it's about a farce which you see rehearsal of, and then you see it backstage, and then you see it done the right way again. Noises Off. But in Act 2, where you see it backstage, my original idea, because it seemed very neat and logical and tidy, was that our curtain should go up at the same moment as the curtain should go up upstage on the terrible farce Nothing On the actors are playing. So the two curtains should rise simultaneously, and the two acts, our act should start when their act starts, which is a very neat and deft idea. Michael Blakemore said, no one is going to have the faintest idea what's going on. They simply won't be able to understand. Are we backstage in the theatre? Who are these people? What are they doing? He said, before their curtain goes up, we've got to get all the actors on stage. We've got to explain exactly where they've got to in the tour, like what their relations are to each other, who's in love with whom, who's fallen out with whom, and we've got to introduce all the props, so we know what we're going to see when we get to the silent bit. And I resisted that for a long time. I had such a neat idea, the two curtains got together. But in the end, I had to concede he was right, and I've rewritten that scene a great deal and got more and more of the props on display. And now we're reviving it. Michael Blakemore said He did originally 5 casts in London, 2 in New York, 1 in Australia, and he really did not wish to have anything more to do with that play. And then the problem was to find another director and to forge a new relationship with a new director. And that was a long and agonizing process. And by
Excuse me,
some-
yes. How did you do that?
Well,
And who did you find, and what was the process?
we had a long, long list of directors, and we thought about it, argued about it. And I got sent to see a show called in England called Spend, 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 a British musical, a fairly rare breed. And it was directed by a man called Jeremy Sams. Well, I knew Jeremy Sams because he had begun as a musician, and he had written the music for a play, a collection of Chekhov short plays I did called The Sneeze, years before. Then he became a translator, and become a very distinguished translator from German, from French, from Italian, from almost any language you can think of. And he'd gone into directing. Well, as soon as I saw Spend, 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 I thought, this man can organize something very complicated on the stage and at the same time retain a sense of human feeling. And he has been, it turned out, as tough a taskmaster as Michael Blakemore was. When we did the show again, I've seen it about 1 million times, and I knew there are various things I wanted to try and improve. And I told Jeremy that, rather bravely, saying, I think I'd like to do a little rewriting on this. I didn't realize how much rewriting he was going to make me do. And we had another long process, like the original process with Michael Blakemore, where we went through it line by line, and he said, well, why did you do that? All the rest of it. Agonizing process. We've got it a bit better as a result.
Good. Well, that's one. Now, now we have live playwrights, and I'd like to ask Sean, since you were talking about dead playwrights, and you're in the middle of doing Strindberg. You are given a play with a long history that included Laurence Olivier and all that, and now you have 2 giants, still young giants, albeit in one sense, actors who really bring to the stage their own personas. How do you deal with that as a director? Here are major players in this.
Well, first of all, the first giant, which is a much greater and harder giant to grapple with than either Ian McKellen or Helen Mirren, who are the 2 giants you're referring to, is the giant of August Strindberg himself. Because the play is just utterly frightening to work on, really. I mean, I turned it down for 5 years.
Did you?
Yeah, yeah. Jerry Schoenfeld of the Schubert Organization has been asking me to do this play for 5 or 6 years. I've said no so many times, and then finally I felt, or I had the courage, or maybe I was a little older, maybe I felt that I could tackle such a dark relationship, but I think that the key to it was finding the person who did the translation, and that's where my relationships with writers have been, have grown and being creative in the theatre, is working with somebody who would adapt, as Michael has done, the classics. And actually, it's an amazing task to do, because hitherto it's been largely done by academics, but in the last 20 years or even less, it's become far more standard for playwrights to do the adaptations. And what a difference it makes, because when a playwright does the adaptation, well, for a start, if you can get a playwright who speaks the original language, that's a huge bonus. But if not, what will happen is you commission a literal translation of the work. So we had the Swedish play translated into English for our purposes. But a playwright then will take the literal translation and turn it in such a way that the actors can really speak it. So it doesn't sound like a translation or an historic piece. It doesn't sound fusty. It doesn't sound one removed. And I think that's the fashion for doing the classics now from another language. And in our case, of course, we have Richard Greenberg, because this was an American production, and I wanted it to be as American as possible. At the end of the day, there are the 2 stars out of the 3 stars, 2 of them are English and 1 is American. But that is a coincidence, because I just started doing the play. In terms of working with those stars, I mean, it's like you said, I guess, about Chita Rivera and Julie Andrews. I mean, actually, somebody in the chorus can have just as big an ego as Chita Rivera. I mean, ego is something it doesn't just necessarily go with talent. Ego is something that we all grapple with in our daily lives. I don't know. I mean, I think that you work from whatever tools you can work from, and when you're working with McKellen and Mirren and David Strathairn, who's the third actor in the play, you're working with such talented actors. That's all that really matters. I think what was difficult about this was the negotiation because of the nature of the play. It's about a feuding, very dark, very destructive marriage, and a la Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. It's got that sort of savage tension in the play. And I think to negotiate the relationship between the characters Edgar and Alice, and to marry that negotiation between McKellen and Mirren, it was tough. It's psychologically tough. But a director has always been a therapist to some degree. I mean, the director has to do what Michael talked about of sitting down with a writer. He then has to go away and do that with a designer, and then potentially with a choreographer, and then with all the actors, let alone dealing with the producers and having a really good relationship with the producers. Because the worst thing that can happen in a production is that you have two camps, the producers and the artists. That's the most fatal thing. We're all working towards the same end. So the director has got to be the person who weaves through all of that. I'm just very relieved the show's open and has been, well received. But it was tough. Not because their egos are tough, but because the parts are tough and the writing is tough. The writing is savage and extraordinary. And bleak. I mean, Strindberg is unbelievably ahead of his time. You can't begin to imagine how this man wrote that play 100 years ago. I would never stick my hand up and say it's the most perfectly made play. It's not. Put it next to Ibsen's great crafting. It's not. But in terms of its themes and in terms of its ideas and in terms of what he was saying about man's inhumanity and the theatre, it's unbelievably modern and prescient.
Well, yeah, the reason I asked that, there's a wonderful story about Tony Richardson and being, as a young director, being asked to direct Dame Edith Evans in the 1000th time she was doing Importance of Being Earnest. He walked in about 5 minutes late and she was directing everybody. And he said, excuse me, Dame Edith, I'm Tony Richardson, I'd like to, I'm your director. And she said, oh, how sweet, well, sit over there, we'll be with you in a moment. That's what, but that's a powerhouse, and that's what.
But to some degree, the theatre was more like that then. Those. I mean, everybody wore suits. People were called Mr. and Miss. You didn't use first name terms. The formality and the power of the star. Of course, the power of the star is huge today, but the power of the star was different then. And directors were more enablers. Now we've been through a period of directors' theatre where, the Hamlet on roller skates created that directors' theatre. We have, the RSC has a lot to answer for. And of course, in American theatre, like the director-choreographer, the musical theatre, which has created these star directors, the ones you were talking about earlier. So a director does have a different status now to 30 years ago. Although Tony Richardson, of course, himself was a great star director, and I'm sure he handled Dame Edith just fine and dandy.
Well, I think ultimately, yes, indeed. Greg, tell us, back up a little bit, how did you get into this business? I mean, I know you got into off-Broadway and in Chicago, but tell us a little bit about your background, where you came from, because you suddenly exploded on the New York scene, in one sense. And how did that happen? How did you get here?
Well, there's a large theater community which is largely invisible to mainstream audiences in New York and off Broadway, but also around the country in cities like Chicago and San Francisco and Houston. And basically, they're bands of friends who come together, and they're just very passionate about creating theater. And for whatever reason, they don't find their way to the commercial world, either because they love the ensemble which they've joined. Like in Chicago, this tradition it's expressed in companies like Steppenwolf and Second City, and a company called Organic Theater, which was around for a while. So it's very much about ensembles and groups of friends who they want to goof off. They want to get a job or settle for really bad jobs, but their passion and their heart is in creating these small shows in theaters which probably have anywhere from 40 to 60 seats. And so that's where I spent most of my time. And writing plays, and it was a wonderful place to do that because...
now, where was that?
Well, I started in Chicago.
With a specific company?
Yeah, I worked with the Cardiff Giant Theatre Company, and then later with a company called the Neo-Futurists that do a show called Too Much Light Makes the Baby Go Blind, which is their best-known show.
That sounds good.
Yeah, it's
Well,
yeah, it's a program of 30 plays in 60 minutes, which are performed in a random order determined by the audience. So it's very chaotic, and there's this tradition which I joined in the late '80s, which was wasn't interested in commercial theater. It wanted something that was very, to our mind, very sort of rough and raw and immediate, where the division between the audience and the actors was almost non-existent, and that budgets were in the hundreds of dollars as opposed to the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that was, it was sort of it's thinking about it now and seeing the commercial world as it is, it seems like madness that anyone would ever want to do that. Because, we had our own visions of like, oh, well, see, we're going to be like Second City or whatever. But really, it's just a very rare experience. But what was great about it, it was a very raw writing experience where you wrote for your friends and your friends told you immediately what they thought of it. There were no previews. And really, the shows were not written until sort of somewhere in the run. It was when they were finally done. And so, for the most part, you got slammed. The press hated you. But it was all about the passion of doing it. And this play, Urinetown, was it premiered to the audience as part of the New York International Fringe Festival, and it just kind of kept on moving along. And our expectation was that we wrote this thing, and a few of our friends will see it, and it will have been done. We can plant our flag, and that was it, and shake hands and walk away from it. But it had a lot of luck. And so that's where I come from, where the show comes from.
what's your education?
I got a Bachelor's of Political Science from the University of Chicago, which also has a tradition of intellectuals, I guess, who don't really, they don't have anything useful to offer the world. And they're very aware of this. And the best they can hope for is I started doing theater I did university theater, but when I started getting serious about it, I was doing it in a bar on the south side of Chicago called Jimmy's Woodlawn Tap. And on 55th Street, this is where the Compass Players came from in Second City. And these were our heroes, people who had no training, had questionable ability, but they didn't want to get a job. We didn't want to get a job either. So we thought maybe if we just work in this bar for a while, Lynn Meadow will come and say, "Oh, I've got the."
I wish I had.
Come and you won't have to work anymore. It'll be great.
Sometimes it's safer there, I have to say.
Oh, in the bar?
It's a lot more creative and a lot safer until you get into that commercial world, and that's when all the walls start closing in on you.
But we're talking about passion, aren't we?
Right.
And just trying to keep it alive. And it's, unfortunately, when more money is involved, a lot of times, as Sean was saying, there can be a friction between the producers and the artistic team. When there's not that money, there's not necessarily that friction. And
Right.
not necessary. But so we're trying to keep this incubator feeling in order to create, aren't we? To the feeling, as arduous as it is to go through the script with Michael Blakemore, is you're only in touch with your passion. You're not thinking about anything else other than trying to make it happen. I think that's the scary part, when we are all these interferences in our work, and when it stops being about the work and it becomes about people's egos, and you lose sight of really what it's about.
Well, that brings up the thing that
when
we were
we
bringing
hate
to.
it.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit earlier before the show, and I don't want to. It's hard to bring them up without bashing them, but the relation to the critics. We were talking about what that does, and when you get a bad review, then what happened. And I think we were all a little bit. Might want to mention that again. But we were talking about when you had a bad review and what that we found it freeing.
Right. I was mentioning to George that I did a musical, actually with a wonderful choreographer named Jerry Mitchell, and we were we had that relationship of one finishing the other sentences, and it was a terrific experience of a piece based on the Captain's Courageous. And we just loved it. There were 16 guys and me and Jerry, and it was heaven. We loved the piece, and we loved creating it, and the audiences came every night, and they loved it, and they wept, and the press came in, and to a person, they just called it the worst thing they had ever seen in their lives. They just hated it. I mean, really vilified it. And I was saying to George, for me as a director, it was actually a very liberating experience.
You were a free woman.
I was free. It didn't matter anymore. And I understood that we do what it is that we do. And I understood that there is a ritual in the theater. It's like communion. This thing happens, and communion is offered. And there are some people who decide to come forward and take communion. Other people sit back and they don't want to, and audience members who don't want to participate. But the fact that people are sitting back does not invalidate the ritual of communion. So I could own my act of communion and say, this is, every night we're having a great time doing this. And I think what was interesting was, as a director, really not to feel that I had to be safe anymore. And I went from doing that to doing a new play with Charles Busch called The Tale of the Allergist's Wife that was kind of an outrageous piece. But I didn't care anymore. It just didn't make any difference. I was going to really follow my passion and do what I felt like doing. So I think it can be a gift to be free of what other people think.
But how did you and the cast react to this? What happened with them when the review came out? What did the cast do?
Well, increasingly, I find that actors don't like to read reviews while they're performing. They find that if they're very good, that it doesn't make them feel as good as they want to feel, and if they're very bad, it hurts their feelings. So they prefer to just kind of wait. I think a lot of playwrights, too. It's not that they don't necessarily care at some point to read them, but as you're performing every night, I think they don't want to have voices in their head commenting on what it is they're doing. So we went about our business. The audiences continued to love the show, so we had a subscription audience at the Manhattan Theater Club, so that kind of protected us, and we did what we needed to do.
I do think it's very tough for actors getting reviews, because they do have to go back and do the show after the reviews have come out, and even if they don't read their reviews, they have a feeling of what the tone of the reviews is, because people are coming up to them and saying, I wouldn't read the review in the Times today. Or they say, what a so-and-so he is, isn't he? And you know you've got a bad review. I mean, it's bad enough for the writer and the director. It's very miserable getting bad reviews, but at least you don't have to face the audience again. Actually turning up and facing the audience, if someone has publicly rubbished you and said how awful you are, very, very painful, I think.
Painful, but I think sometimes I've seen actors tremendously insulated if they are in touch enough with why they're doing it and what the story is that they're trying to tell. I've seen companies actually get stronger as a result of getting reviews that aren't so good, and they just say, okay, well, we believe in this, and I don't mean to say that it doesn't hurt and it's not painful, but sometimes you see companies really strong. I've seen a number.
You can also see the critics really out of step with the public.
Yeah.
For the thing that I got my very worst reviews for, I received my most number of fan letters. So, how do you work that out? I mean, it sort of makes you into a case when you get very bad reviews, of course, because most people run away, but the few people who believe in you, they come out even stronger for you.
But you do get the case where you get bad reviews and the public doesn't like it as well.
Yes, that's okay. I think we call that now flop, don't we? That's a term.
But anyone brilliant is capable and should be capable of getting really bad reviews, I think.
Because that's about why.
It's about taking risks.
Okay.
It's about doing the thing that we didn't think we could do. And when we succeed at it, everyone says, oh, well, great, you're in town. We knew. But I'm sure when you were beginning the interview, like, you're in town, you're going to do a musical, you're in town, and here, so now it becomes, oh, sure, but it's a high wire act.
Right.
Then, is review ever helpful?
Yes, bad reviews can be helpful if you get a chance to have another go at it. I always read reviews so as to know what's the basis of the decisions that producers and the public are making. And when I've had a chance to have another go at writing something that's got bad reviews, I've tried to force myself to read the bad reviews and try and understand what went wrong. It's often not what the critic thinks has gone wrong. You get reviewed, you get a bad review for something. And you realize, when you think about it, he's misunderstood something, or he's taken off on the wrong point. And you think if you could just get it clearer, if you could just make clearer what you had in mind, you can get it a bit better. It doesn't often happen, because if you get really bad reviews, you don't normally get a chance to do the thing again, but occasionally you do.
Do another one.
Right, yes.
As Alan Avery said, just do another one very quickly and make them see it. I think there's a difference, though, between the subsidized theater and the commercial theater in this regard, though, where some of our subsidized theaters, like the Manhattan Theater Club, where an audience is going to come for a 10-week period, regardless of the reviews, it's a different story from a commercial, a Broadway run, where the show won't run if the reviews aren't positive. So it really, it's a different mindset.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's, one thing, and I was going to say, when you have a hit like Aida,
Right.
and you go on to another production of it. You're talking about doing it in Amsterdam,
Right.
and you go over from the original. We don't have to do the ballet score by Verdi.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
what do you do? Do you try when you do to recreate that, or when you're doing a revival, you say, I think I can do something different here, or do you take it to a different place?
Well, for me, I never stop. I mean, I'm never satisfied with what I do, and it's obvious. Me as a choreographer, I push buttons, and I do take risk, and I don't play it safe. And when I start playing it safe, that's when I'm going to go garden somewhere and just be a gardener. But I feel like I need to grow too, and I don't feel like there's a formula. And you know, if you approach a piece and saying, okay, this is the safe way to go, this is the formula, this is what they expect to be done as choreographically, without kind of like investigating some other possibilities, for me it's not interesting. I always put myself on the limb. I always want to learn. I always want to figure out a different way of approaching stuff to make it exciting for me. I mean, it's a passion that I like, so if I'm not up on something, I'll do it. So to get back to your question, every time I've done one of the shows and recreated the shows, I've done Aida. This is our third production. We have a road company, the New York company, and the Amsterdam company. I've changed things constantly, and I'm always fixing and trying to make it clear. I mean, I don't think Aida was an easy piece. No. You know, it's a big success. The audience loves it, but we were not accepted very well. But it didn't seem to matter. I mean, the audience.
There's a good example.
Their audience really loves it, and there's something really moving and beautiful about the piece. God only knows what the reviewers saw that bugged them, but obviously it really bugged them. But again, it didn't matter. I mean, it is a beautiful piece. I mean, I think it has a lot of baggage. I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, there's the opera that is well known.
You don't have a big heavy soprano there.
Right. There's Elton John, which comes in a mix, which throws everything up in the air. I mean, it's a contemporary musical. It's a beautifully visual musical. Bob Crowley did a beautiful job. I'm part of that tapestry. It was interesting and very difficult to tell that story about that love triangle, and have an ensemble of an amazing dancers come alive and push that story along.
Did you have to put the opera out of your mind, parenthetically, or not, or didn't you care?
I never thought about it once. I mean, I knew we didn't have elephants, so we didn't, so I had to create my own elephant. Obviously, I have, yeah. I mean, I think it's a process, and it's a learning process that you just got to keep learning.
Rob, do you have something?
Well, I was just thinking, you said how many you've done the show 3 times now, and we were fortunate enough to get to do a production of Thoroughly Modern Millie in La Jolla last fall. And after that experience, I'm a firm believer in that even more advantageous than a workshop is to actually do a production in front of people, like people that come in, normal people that come in, because you learn so much about the show.
I don't believe in
in that.
workshops. I mean, but that's my own opinion. I mean, a workshop a long time ago when Michael Bennett created that, when we did Chorus Line, it was really about the actors and the director and being in a room and being very creative without showing anyone. And we did 2 workshops. Workshops became this other thing where it's not about trying out the material, it's about doing the material and waiting to be criticized about what's wrong with the material, how can we make the material better. I don't think it's a very beneficial process.
Well, also in a workshop, you fabricate these great little inventions to get the show on in the workshop.
Right.
That
It has
so many
nothing to do
people,
with the
that has
show.
nothing to do with the show, but it's your ingenuity to make it move.
You
And
manipulate
then
it,
people
right.
fall in love with that.
Right.
Like, oh, that was so cool the way that everybody moved everything themselves. And
Right.
then people get married to that, and then you go, okay, do we have to do that in the show now? Or are they not going to like it if we... You know, so it's very tricky, but when you do a real production in front of an audience, then you can really learn about the show.
Well, in the case of a musical, the set is such another character too. And how,
It is.
So not to have that, you know, whereas doing a play is also you probably can accomplish
a little
something that you
easier,
can't.
yeah.
Right.
Well, I think sets are also in certain plays. Isn't the set in A Dance of Death is?
It's a pretty big character, yes.
Well, it's
it
a big
is.
character, sure.
It
Yeah,
is,
so
yeah.
it can.
Absolutely.
But I mean, we actually, in England, I workshop everything, but it's behind closed doors. At the National Theatre Studio, we have the privilege of being able to go in, and if I were going to do a play with Michael, for instance, the the process he described, Michael Blakemore picking on every single line, I would want to do that with Michael and a group of, say, 6 actors. Or
Right, but that's for you.
And that's purely in private,
Right.
and it's purely, and I might do 1, 2, maybe even if I was lucky, 3 of those over a period of 9, 10 months
That's
a year
great, yeah.
before I did the production.
Yeah.
But I mean, one used to go on the road with things or try things out in a theatre before time, because you do learn more from the audience than from anybody at that point.
Right.
You can only get a show to a certain level, then the audience comes in and they tells you all the things that you know that you haven't
Because
found.
this is absolutely the essence of theatre. It's not somebody doing something, sitting up here doing something. It's a conversation with the
Absolutely.
audience. And the audience is an absolutely essential and vital part. And until you know how they regard their end of the conversation, you don't know anything about the show at all.
But it feels like there's a lack of product somewhere, that everyone is so anxious that if we go do a little workshop somewhere and we let 100 people come in to see, that everyone is so anxious to see it, to critique it, to decide if it's the next hit, to get on the internet, I mean, it seems, it's like it's a fervor almost, and it doesn't allow you any, you keep trying to go further away from New York
That
to try to
incubator
workshop.
thing.
You know, it's like, can I just have a little space to try to make some mistakes? And
I
it seems
think
like...
workshops today are mostly for raising money.
Right, I think
To have
so,
the
too.
producers here and to see what kind of show we can get out and what kind of money we can get for
That's
it.
right.
I think this is more an American concept than an English one. Do you have workshops there?
Well, as Sean says, people do workshop things, and I think with musicals, people do sort of do tryouts of various sorts, don't they? They put on scenes. I've never been involved in doing a musical.
I think
so
not quite
don't
to
know.
the extent that you have here, but I think they do sort of back as workshops. Yes. But as you say, it's fundraising. Yeah.
But don't you think it would help if the producers were maybe a little, in general, were a little more creative and a little more trusting and needed to see less right there in front of them? Like, how's it going to look with 8 girls instead of 4 girls? How's it going to look if they're in 3-inch heels instead of, I mean, everyone wants, no one wants to take any creative chances. They want to see it right in front of them because that's what their investors want to see, or they think they want to see.
Well, we
And-
can
But what
thank
you're
Hollywood
saying-
for a lot of that, I'm afraid, because that's, it's all got to be absolutely on the drawing board before anybody will give a penny to anything, and that's taken that the theatre's become much more like that. It is frightening.
But also what you're saying is that in order to sell it then, you're actually creating something that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the thing that you want to do.
right, yeah.
So
No,
you
exactly.
yeah, that really makes
that's
sense.
exactly what happens.
Yeah,
a lot.
I think we really have to think about this.
Well, there's a great difference between really good producers and indifferent producers. Indifferent producers are trying to guess what other people's taste is going to be. They're thinking, will people like this? Will people like this? Will the critics like it? Will the public come in? A good producer is sitting there thinking, do I like this or do I not? And if he's a really good producer, his taste happens to fit in with the taste of the public often enough to make the thing work. But if you haven't got that personal response to the show, and if your taste isn't sufficiently in line with public taste for it mostly to come off, you really shouldn't be a producer.
Right.
We have very few of those producers around anymore.
There are.
We do.
You're right.
I have to
I
say, having the opportunity to work with Garth Drabinsky on a couple of shows, he is that kind of producer, and there's something about that leader, that true leader, not leading from a checkbook or leading with
Fear.
some suit behind him, like going, "Well, I wish the girls were prettier," whatever. I mean, Garth had his own
Right.
his own vision,
Right.
and was very true to that, and that helps the show a great deal. Whether the show's a success or not, it doesn't matter. It's a clean, clear vision. You know, when you have a showman like that behind you.
Well, you know, we talked about Hollywood and film. Now, Sean, you did Bent. Now, did you do it in the theater first, or did you go right to the film?
No, I did it in theatre. I did it I did the first sort of major revival of it at the National Theatre, which was about, I did it in, I think, 1990. It was about 10 or so years after its first production. And then when I was asked to make a movie of it, I said yes for reasons of affection for the piece and passion for the piece, but I didn't think in a million years it would ever get made into a movie. And it only had the good luck of being made into a movie because at that time a gentleman called David Orkin ran Film 4. And he had had spent all his life in the theatre, and he took tremendous risks on people who'd worked in theatre and, you know, brought them to film, and so it got all the funding it needed.
And so you ended up directing both sides of that.
Well, I directed it in the theatre, and then I
Theatre.
directed it on film, yeah.
Yeah. And again, there you don't have the advantage of having the conversation with an audience. So how was your approach? This is about the theatre, not
George,
film.
can you hold that for the next session? It's
Sure.
time for you to tell everybody to take a break at this point.
Take a break.
No, tell them why.
Well, we are going to then go continue a bit and then have some questions from all of you, if we may. So I thank you all.
This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Welcome back to the American Theatre Wing's Working in the Theatre seminar on playwright, director, and choreographer. Before returning to our panelists, I would like to remind you that these seminars and the Wing's Tony Awards given for excellence in the theatre are just a part of the Wing's year-round programs. As a long-established charity, the Wing's mission is to promote excellence in the theatre and to provide educational and humanitarian services through the theatre. Our meaningful and important programs for students include Introduction to Broadway, which in its 10-year history has enabled close to 100,000 New York City high school students to attend a Broadway show, many for the first time. The Wing also introduces young people to the theatre and the magic it unfolds by bringing professionals into schools for workshops as a part of our Theatre in School program. Our hospital program, dating back to World War II, when we also created legendary stage door canteens, continues to provide volunteer professionals to entertain patients in hospitals, nursing homes, and centers and child care facilities. Additionally, our grants and scholarship program provides substantial financial support to bring forth new talent and productions. We take pride in the work we do, remain grateful to our members and everyone whose contributions help make possible the dynamic programs of the American Theatre Wing. Our work is so important to the theatre and the community, and we are proud to be a part of this exciting industry. And so, now let's return to our panel on playwrights, directors, and choreographers, and our moderator, George White.
Thank you.
George.
As when we last left this dynamic conversation, Sean, we were talking a little bit about moving a theater piece to film, which you did, which is rare too, because very seldom will you have a you know, a theater director move it. And had you done film before? And
I had written for film, but I hadn't directed, no.
And what was the process that you went through to translate something?
Well, I think the one of the most difficult aspects of it is what we were talking about before in regard to how you set up a production in the theatre now, is that when in getting the money, the raising the finance for the film, you have to lay on the table absolutely everything you're going to do. You have to sort of really lay it out there. And so you, just having a concept isn't enough. You've got to describe in great detail what you're going to do with it before you'll get the backing to do it. And I think that's happening more in the theatre, which is worrying because, as far as I'm concerned, the creative process is a mystery that can't necessarily be laid out. And often if you make decisions too soon, they can turn out to be the wrong decisions. You make the better decisions with the more information you have, and the greater the collaboration has grown. So that was pretty alarming to have to do that. And I only had to do it to a lesser degree because the budget was not too huge. The bigger the budget, the greater the degree I would have had to have gone into infinitesimal detail of what I was going to do with it. But it's an entirely different process, film and theatre. There's absolutely no comparison. And all I can really say is that I enjoyed it hugely, but I was a bit like a schoolboy. I mean, it was just every day was learning.
No, right. And you could survive that as a theatre director. You had to learn and pretend that you knew what you were doing, I assume.
I never pretended I
No.
knew, which is not something that I ever do. I'm always the first to stick up my hand and say, I don't understand, and I mean, I do it now all the time, because I'm not a good bullshitter, so...
Yeah, good. Michael, a couple of things. First of all, Greg talked about his political science background, which, of course, in these days is very good for theater. We all know that. What is your background? Because
I don't want to upstage him. My background is in moral sciences.
well, that figures.
Well, I could take a poll here as to what moral sciences was, and I could guarantee that no one, except possibly Sean Mathias, would have the faintest idea what moral sciences were. It was what they called philosophy at Cambridge when I studied philosophy. No one knew what moral sciences were, and it sounded very impressive. You said, well, I'm a moral scientist. Now, stupidly, they've renamed the department the philosophy department. Everyone's got a philosophy department. No one thinks philosophy is anything special. It's a very silly move.
But your Cambridge education, did that inform something like Copenhagen, or did it inform more Noises Off, or both? Or again, we're back to your mental furniture. I'm sorry about that.
Well, yes, yes. Well, everything, I think. I think there's probably a bit of philosophy in the background, or a bit of moral sciences in the background of all the plays I've written. I try to keep this as quiet as possible, because who wants to come and see a play about philosophy? But this just sparks off so many ideas. If you're interested in philosophy, you get interested in perception, how people know what they know, how people see each other, how they relate to each other. It's all part of philosophy, and that's, of course, also part of plays and novels as well.
And of course, Noises Off is as much about that as
Yeah.
Copenhagen. Right, it's true. But you've also, this is something that we have not had a lot on these seminars, and it relates both to you and to Sean a little bit. I know you've both been involved, although you have actually translated things from Russian and other languages, or just Russian primarily?
I've done things a little from the French. The only two languages I can really translate from are French and Russian, because I wouldn't translate from any language I couldn't read fluently. But I've mostly done Russian, yeah, mostly Chekhov, in fact.
And what is that process for you as a playwright? And I want to also get into the business of Strindberg and how you go. Do you go literal translation, or do you make the leap into what you think works theatrically?
I only translate from languages I can read, so I marinate myself in the original and then try and write a version in English. It's a thankless task, I have to tell you, with Chekhov, because everyone in the country can translate Chekhov better than you can. Everyone knows more about what Chekhov had in mind, even though they can't actually read the Russian original, than you do. And I'm always struck by the chutzpah of critics.
Translate that.
The sheer outrageous cheek of, of critics who wouldn't dream of raising some basic question about an original play, but who haven't the faintest hesitation in telling you you've translated a line of Chekhov wrong when they can't actually read the original themselves. I've just been told, Uncle Vanya, my translation of Uncle Vanya is running in England at the moment. One critic said that I had not used the usual ending and then produced what she regarded as the usual ending. Well, I don't know what the usual ending is. I can just tell you that the ending I've got on is the ending that Chekhov put on. But that wouldn't impress her because she knows more about Chekhov than I do.
What have you translated from the French?
I did a play by Ennui, his last play, which he called Le Nombril. I called it Number One. It's not, I'm afraid, a terribly good play. And I did something that I found very difficult and very enjoyable, which was a version, adaptation of La Belle Hélène, the operetta by Offenbach. And I was asked to do this by English National Opera, and who always play in English, so they translate everything. And I thought the music was just wonderful. Offenbach's music was terrific. I thought the lyrics were wonderful in French, but they were going to be translated anyway, and over half of it is book scenes. That's right, is that the right term? Book scenes, yeah, okay. And they were appalling. They were absolutely frightful. And they usually just try to cut them to the minimum. You have to have quite a lot of them in to get the plot comprehensible. So I said I would not do it if I had to do a straight translation, but if they would let me write a new opera or operetta which used this music, I would do it. So I had tremendous fun. It turned out to be much, much harder work than I ever imagined. How you write lyrics regularly, I cannot think. It almost killed me. But it was wonderfully exhilarating, particularly when we got into the rehearsal room. And they told me that opera singers don't sing out in the rehearsal room, they just mark to save their voices. But in fact, because Offenbach is not very demanding music by opera singer standards, they all sang out all the time. And it was enchanting. I used to go in every day and just listen to music from first thing in the morning to last thing at night. But I'm afraid it wasn't liked by the opera critics, who thought it was outrageous chutzpah on my part to mess around with this hallowed story. And I've never been asked to do anything. So it's mostly been Russian.
You've never translated Feydeau, have you, in a farce?
No, I never have. When I first wrote Noises Off, I did it as a short play. And the farce that they were performing in that was a pastiche Feydeau I'd written, because Feydeau is so delicious pastiche. I mean, it's just such fun writing a Feydeau farce. But in the end, I decided that was sadly not what this tatty company in England would be performing. They'd be performing a tatty English sex farce, so I had to start all over again.
So, yeah. Well, now, Sean, to get back to the process of Strindberg, which is also, I'm sure the critics know a great deal more about Strindberg as they do about Chekhov than you probably did. But tell us how did you go back and start over?
I'm not sure Strindberg is the same sort of sacred cow, as it were, because they haven't done what Michael's described. They haven't done that to our translation here. They've just referred I think Richard Greenberg's had good reviews, but they referred. They haven't gone into any great detail about Strindberg's play. It's been interesting. Whereas when you do a Chekhov, I think because everyone does Chekhov, you do feel it is, it's commonly owned, and you're not allowed to do anything to change it. So this was slightly different, and because this play, Dance of Death, isn't done very often. I mean, it was done at Lincoln Center, I think, about 20 years ago now.
It was, yeah.
And
even longer.
Maybe longer.
Yeah.
There's been a few productions in England, but the most famous one was the Olivier one, and that, of course, is over 40 years ago now, or about 40 years. So it's not done that frequently. So you don't feel that you're necessarily messing around with something that everyone else has a previous claim to, which of course it makes you feel more like you're doing a new play, which was so that was quite liberating. I think what we felt we needed to do here was to make it extremely speakable, so that it would seem, in some senses, more modern for an audience. I wanted to make it feel like it was a new play and bring, without update, we would do it in its period and in its placing and everything. We haven't messed around with any of that, but wanted to make you feel like you could be seeing a play that was written by somebody, you know, just yesterday. And I think we took certain liberties. We took liberties with the third character of Kurt, definitely. Greenberg sort of did do a fair bit of work on him. We worked together on that. And
Well, in what way?
Strindberg says that The Captain is the best part he ever wrote, and I think if you've got a wonderful actor, and we indeed do have, I think it's very hard for that actor to fail in that part. Alice is an extremely good part, but she's they're both monstrous characters, but somehow I sort of do know how, but it's too long to go into that, but somehow his character is slightly more empathetic to the audience. Her character sort of endlessly seems to be savage and cruel and selfish. So I wanted to sort of turn that to some degree, to make her a little more palatable. And partly the casting of Helen Mirren was I wanted to make her very feminine. I didn't want a shrew or a tough actress to play her. I wanted to get a very feminine, sensual actress to play her, and that was the road we took. And then with Kurt, the problem in the translations I'd read several from the original, were that he's much more of a cipher for both of them, and less flesh and blood. And I think we worked very hard to make him flesh and blood as well.
Oh, good. Now, to another little bit, and Michael alluded to this, but I want to toss this one at Greg. In Urinetown, which is special, tell us about the process of writing lyrics. That's a tough question, I know, but
Yeah.
Are you a poet?
No, not at all. I found the process of writing lyrics to me was very much like doing a crossword puzzle, in that you had, the way that we wrote it is, I wrote it out as a book, and we had a certain number of pages that had to be turned into a song. And so we knew what the story had to tell. We knew what the story that the song had to tell, and who needed to be speaking, and what the structure of the scene was going to be. And then it was just a process of taking these lines of dialogue or this monologue and musicalizing it. Typically,
so the lyrics came before the music in Urinetown?
It depended on the song, but we attacked it from whatever angle we needed to do. Sometimes Mark would come in with Mark Holman, the composer, would come in with a melody, and we would search in the scene for what he called a musical hook. There's a scene between the two lovers, and they sing this song called "Follow Your Heart," and that was, this is the classic romance scene where the lovers find each other, and this was a line that Hope, the ingenue, kept repeating, and Mark identified that. Says, okay, this is what we're going to call the song. It's going to be all about this. Follow your heart, and then from there you have a very good. You have the best rhyming dictionary you can find. You have a thesaurus and you have a dictionary, and you just sort of like you write out a line, and then you just. It's like doing a crossword puzzle. It can be really tedious, but it can be really thrilling when you find the right stuff. It can be very mechanical, and it can be very you can write a song in 2 minutes. And probably the best ones are the ones that happen really quickly. So.
Does the playwright write for a specific audience, for example, Broadway or off-Broadway, when you sit down? Are you thinking of what kind of audience this play would address itself to?
I don't know. I guess I think if you had an idea of who your audience was going to be, I think you'd probably be lost. I think you have to. My measure was, if Mark laughed, then it was in. And if he didn't laugh, then forget about it. So, I guess I wrote for him.
I think we're ready to go to questions now. Right. Would you please ask the first question?
Hi, for Lynn Meadow. What particular problems arise when you direct a show that moves from off-Broadway to Broadway?
What are the problems that arise? Well, usually we're just thrilled that has happened.
That's the problem.
That is the problem. No, I think the important thing is I always come back to the mission and what it is that I'm trying to do, and as artistic director of a theater, I have to remember that a show moving from the Manhattan Theater Club to Broadway is a byproduct of what we're doing. It's not the goal of what we're doing. So what I'm really interested in and what I've spent my life doing is working with artists as a director, as an artistic director, and that really is my goal. So I think the problem comes sometimes when if there's a perception from the outside that that's really what this theater is about, and that really gives a wrong message to the people who are attending, and it gives a wrong message to the artists who are working there. So I think it's, you know, it's like that thing of directing a show. You have to keep kind of saying what is it that we're doing, and keep reminding everybody what the main goal is of a particular play or a particular scene. And I feel like it's part of my job to keep reminding everybody what it is we're doing and why we're doing it. And so the problem, I think, can be one of perception, but in the case of The Tale of the Allergist's Wife and Proof moving to Broadway recently from Manhattan Theater Club, we were thrilled. We supported artists, and we did the shows for reasons of believing, as we talked about. These were pieces that I thought were wonderful, and I wanted to do them. So there's a lot that was really fabulous. I can't fetch.
Parenthetically, there is absolutely no relationship between Proof and Copenhagen.
None. They both have one-word titles.
Then there is.
I think people like to find categories, and there happened to be various plays which touched on science or mathematics.
Yeah.
At the time, Copenhagen touches on physics, Proof touches on mathematics, and that seemed like a convenient handle.
And they're both about moral science. Isabel, I'm sorry. Back to you.
Go on.
No, it's back to you. Okay.
Hi, my name is Hallie, and my question is for anyone who'd care to tackle it. I was wondering if the current extensive technology that's available in the theater is an asset or a detriment, and why?
I think it could help. I think it could get overdone and get very technical, where you lose track of what the play or the musical is about, where you start looking at technology. But I think what's out there is pretty amazing. It's just if it's overproduced or not overproduced. It's really a taste thing. I mean, I don't know how you guys
I
feel.
think that one thing that happens when you're trying to, let's say, set design, because that tends to use some of those things more. One thing that you try to do is the set designer will tell you, yeah, we can do anything. It's all according to budget. A lot of it.
Right.
So I know that in meetings, for example, meetings on a new show, you say, I would love it if this elevator could come out of the center of the turntable. Is that possible? Yeah, it's possible. It's expensive. So it's great that your mind can go anywhere, but also you eventually have to get down to the budgetary point. So then somehow you feel like a kid who's had something taken away when you're told, yeah, sure, everyone can fly, the entire cast can fly, because it's possible now, but it's not practical.
But also the heart of theater, the thing that makes it different from film, is that there's live people on stage and people in the audience. You can see each other, and a problem or an effect that can be created very simply, with a pot. As opposed to a huge lighting system, sometimes just seems so much more satisfying, because it's all about what you do with that medium as opposed to what you do in spite of the medium.
Right.
So
Yes.
The boundaries could be more effective sometimes when you're confined to something. You have to make that come alive instead of such a broad scope of what it is, and then it's beyond your imagination, and then it kind of takes over.
I also think that post-September 11th, there is a recognition that we all feel of what being in a theater means, and what you're talking about, and the power of being with a live audience, and the sense of community that people are feeling, and that sense of kind of well-being, and the simplicity of that we're reminded of it in a way that's much more vivid than we were aware of before. And maybe that makes us understand that it's not about technology. It's really about the communal event that takes place, and how grateful we are to be able to do it.
Right.
It's true. Absolutely. Sir.
Okay, my name is John Francis Fox. My question is for Sean Mathias. Do you think that British actors are usually better at doing classic plays, and if so, why?
Step lightly. Lightly.
I think that Americans are better at doing musicals.
Get your glasses.
No, I don't, because this is my 4th show in New York, and I absolutely love working here. And if I thought that British actors were better at doing classic plays, I wouldn't come and work here, to be honest. I mean, I love working with Americans, and I love working in New York. I think that in Britain it's disbanding somewhat. There's been a huge repertory system where young actors have gone out and learned their craft, and so actors have gone into a system whereby a system that exists all year round with a certain amount of funding, whereby they will be in as many as 6, maybe even more plays within 1 year. They might stay in that company for a year or 2. And so actors before now learnt their craft there, doing the classics and contemporary plays, and learnt their stage technique, and then they could possibly go off and get to the RSC or the Royal National Theatre if they were lucky enough. That has changed somewhat, and most young actors in Britain don't give 2 hoots about that now, because they have fabulous film careers or careers in TV, which are very lucrative. So, yes, we have an amazing tradition of trained actors who were wonderful for serving classical theatre. That has broken down to some degree, and it's sad that it's broken down. But it's great that we've got actors that we can put on film. We never had that before. You had the monopoly on that, apart from the rare people like somebody like Laurence Olivier or Michael Caine, somebody who came along. There were very few British movie stars. Now there are a lot of British actors, young British actors without being big stars, have movie careers as well. So, I mean, I just think that the theatre has changed a lot. And
I think also there's been a shift in attitude towards the classics in New York. I came to New York about 15 years ago with Ian McKellen to do an adaptation I've made from a Chekhov play, which we call Wild Honey, which had worked well in London, didn't succeed here. But the producers said, can we get Chekhov's name off the billing? As they said, it's poison in New York. And I think that's now changed. I think you can do Chekhov in New York. And
Are those producers?
Yeah, that's one.
That's the premises.
Yes, this question is from Michael Frayne and Greg Cotis. How valuable do you think writing classes are?
I haven't taken many writing classes, so I don't know. The advice that I was given by Bernie Solins, who was the producer of Second City for many years, he said that the only way you're going to learn is to put your stuff in front of an audience. That was his contention, and I followed that advice, which was really bad advice for a long time, but now it turns out it's good advice. So I think the thing is, what people have been saying is true. You have to put your stuff in front of people and see how they respond, because it's about clarity. It's about telling stories. And you won't have that answer. The show isn't done until the audience sees it, and everything you do before that is preparation. But the preparation can't be. The audience is your teacher. Is the most important teacher, I think.
Michael. Well, I've never taken a writer's class, never been near one, so I wouldn't know. It sounds a bit implausible to me. Though when you're up against it, as I am at the moment, struggling with a new play, I realise I don't know anything about playwriting whatsoever. And I was doing an interview in New York yesterday with someone who explained one of the basic principles of playwriting to me. And I was so grateful that somebody when he said that at the end of Act 1 you have to have set up a big conflict between 2 characters. That's what a good idea. I never thought
Maybe you shouldn't listen now.
So then I began to think maybe I've missed something. Maybe I've been a bit of a fool not to go to it. Actually, when you were writing a play, you'd do anything. You'd go to a writer's class, you'd...
to get away from it.
Yes, correspondence lessons, anything to get the thing done.
Do you want to let us in on what the new play you're struggling with?
It's too early in the struggle even to know.
I see.
couldn't tell you. No.
Oh, well, all right. That's
I'm sorry to interrupt, but once more, there is not enough time to continue to get all the information and all the knowledge that's available on this panel. I'm so sorry that we have to stop it, but it has been one of the real problems of my life that we cannot go on and on and on with the wonderful people that come to be part of the American Theatre Wing seminars.